Okay, let me talk a little bit about fairy tales and childhood stories and the importance and influence of those. First of all, the child will find a story that existentially fits his or her predicament. So what's happening to the characters in the story feels like what's happening in the child's life. And the story gives the child a magical sense of power and control in a situation where otherwise the child would feel helpless. So the story is very empowering to the child because it gives the child hope and a magical way of getting back to a position of okayness and unconditional love. So the story becomes the basic template for the individual's life script. It feels like to the child, if I can just make my life go like the fairy tale, I too can end up living happily ever after. The only problem is the story is based on magic and doesn't work in reality. And that's why, as an adult, it needs to be redecided in terms of changing the elements to things that will work in reality. Like the last example, what was a very important decision was to speak up and talk and reveal herself and discover that now it's not true that people think she's ugly or doesn't like her or whatever. And she can experience now the love and acceptance that she didn't get to experience as a child with her parents. Any questions about that? So a lot of times when people are learning script theory, they think, well, should I not let my child read any fairy tales? And the answer is, they're going to find them regardless. And they serve a very important function for the child. They give the child a sense of power and control, where otherwise they would feel helpless. Yes?
Do you think that because often we find fairy tales and we make them the basic template of our life script, that we can get stuck on that fairy tale life, and then we are trying to adapt our life to follow that template instead of readapting it?
Yes, if we don't really bring into awareness what's going on, we can just automatically follow that as a magical solution. There are stories that kids find that are very problem-solving. Pippi Longstockings is a good example. Now, she's a very resourceful girl who figures out how to do all kinds of things, solve problems and so on. So there are some stories that really teach problem solving. Unfortunately, many of the stories teach us that if we want to be rescued in some way, we first have to be a big enough victim to make that happen. Like Cinderella. If the fairy godmother hasn't come along yet, then I need to work a little harder and suffer a little more. And if I just feel bad enough long enough, then she will show up. Or if I want to be really liked and well regarded, I first have to start out as an ugly duckling. Or whatever. Yes?
Just a question about the exercise. You took us back to when we were 6 years old. The significance of that particular choice.
If you remember earlier, I talked about how the child between 4 and 6 begins to pull together all their previous experiences to make sense out of that, and that's when the script is originally formed. And it's formed in the way that I took you through the exercise. And the child is feeling a certain way, and then concludes certain things about themselves and others, and then decides what they're going to do in light of that, and finds a story consistent with that. Yes?
How can you explain the imaginary friends that a child has at the age of, in that age?
Yes.
They talk to that imaginary friend, right?
Right.
I've seen that.
Right. So between 4 and 6, again, kids are into magical thinking, and they often have imaginary friends, which is part of that whole process of fantasizing and working out issues and so forth, and having a companion and not feeling so alone, and all of those things. And that's a very normal process, to have an imaginary friend at that age. Later, about 8 to 12, most kids have a best friend, which again is an important part of their development in terms of having relationships. Any other questions about the life script and how that's formed? Yes?
Any recommendations if you're having trouble finding a story, or if you're kind of pulling from a few different stories, or what to do with that?
There's several options. Sometimes people don't find a story until later. So you can think about your favorite story at around 7 to 12, or adolescence, or a favorite movie or character. Sometimes it's a Bible story. Sometimes it's, you can even make up your own story that seem to fit your life as a kid. So there are a number of different ways you can do that. The story I identified with, I actually had a couple of stories. One was in early childhood, which was Peter Rabbit, and another one was in latency when I was about 12, about a little frontier kid. And oftentimes people will come up with new stories in adolescence. Adolescence is a time of sort of rewriting the script, when kids are into forming their identity. And they start identifying with more real-life heroes and heroines. Baseball players, rock stars, other folks that become real-life models for them. Any other questions? All right. I want to say a few words about how people make the external world fit their internal belief system or script. And I want to talk about a concept that Jackie Schiff came up with, which is frames of reference. The script is a frame of reference for making sense out of the world. Jackie pointed out that it's a way to justify our life script and thereby keep our world consistent and predictable. It is maintained through discounting, which is minimizing, ignoring, information that's relevant to solving a problem. Also by redefining. Redefining is when we take in information and change it internally to something else. And then what are called tangential and blocking transactions. Redefining is an internal process, so you don't see it externally. What you see are what are called tangential and blocking transactions. If you want to see redefining, watch a politician being interviewed. The reporter will ask the politician a question, and they redefine it internally into something else and respond tangentially. So what they're saying is vaguely related to the question, but they're really answering the question they want to answer as opposed to what the reporter has said. And so when people don't respond directly to your questions, they're usually redefining it internally. What time is it? Oh, I just got this new watch the other day, and man, I really like it, and let me show it to you, and so on. So they're talking vaguely about time, but they're not answering your question. So they've redefined internally what time is it to, yeah, I have a nice watch, and let me show it to you. A blocking transaction is when the person blocks the question rather than responds. Like, what are you feeling? You mean physically or emotionally? And they block your question by asking another question. So you will see both types of transactions that really indicate that redefining is going on internally for the person. So Jackie pointed out that all of us are born as a natural, free, spontaneous little kid. And then we encounter parents and often have to adapt certain of our behaviors in order to get along well with the parents. We develop a further adaptation, which is thinking rationally or cognitively. And then we internalize a parent from our parents and other authority figures. And all of that gives a frame of reference to make sense out of the world. And it's all being driven by that natural child that makes decisions about how best to operate in the world. If I feel unloved and untaken care of, I may decide to stay little and dependent on my parents in hopes that one day they will take care of me the way I should be taken care of. Or I may decide I've got to do it on my own and figure it all out, so I operate primarily out of adult. Or I may decide that I can have worth or value if I just take care of other people. Then I'll be appreciated. So from that natural child, I'll make decisions about where best to operate or what ego state will serve me best or how I should be in the world. But what's driving all of that is that free child or natural child who's made decisions about how best to take care of myself. Now, other people I'm dealing with have a similar structure with their own frame of reference, which may be very different from mine. And they may have made decisions about how best to operate in the world. So if I've decided to stay little so that I can get people to take care of me, I may find somebody who's decided to hurry up and grow up and be responsible, take care of other people so they'll be appreciated. and then we form a relationship in which I play child, they play parent. It's a compatible relationship. Oftentimes, when people get into arguments, they may be using the same word, but have entirely different meanings to the word that they're using. Like one person says, I think it's important to be autonomous. And the other person says, why would you want to be so selfish? Now they have two totally different definitions of autonomy. One person means, I think it's important to make your own choices. The other person is defining autonomy is, I think it's important to do what you want without regard to other people. So it's really important in conflict to stop and define your frames of reference. What you mean by the word that you're using. Because often people are arguing apples and oranges. You know, they're using the same word, but they have entirely different definitions. So it's really important to define the meaning of words that you're saying and not simply assume that the other person has the same meaning attached to it. When people drop their frames of reference and transact directly, naturally, that's what intimacy is all about. When we're being open and honest and direct with the other person. And again, that frame of reference is often maintained by discounting, which is minimizing, deleting, or distorting the information that's relevant to solving the problem. And then redefining the meaning of it. So any questions about that? Yeah.
So interesting that you're saying that intimacy is in the natural child as opposed to the adult. It's
Yes.
fascinating to me. And when you were saying they were open, honest, and direct, and I think also a natural child is vulnerable.
Right.
And they take risks.
That's right.
Whereas an adult, I already have, this is how the world should be, like you're saying. This is, again, fascinating. I'm so happy I'm here. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah, intimacy really is a function of natural child to natural child, with the parents taking the position of protecting that transaction. I will not do anything to intentionally harm you, nor will I allow you to do something to harm me. And the adults are monitoring the process. Eric Byrne used to joke that the best lovemaking is when the adults are standing at the bedroom door making sure the parents don't get into the room so the kids are free to play with each other in bed. And that's kind of what is going on in intimacy. The adults are monitoring and using their parent to provide safety and protection because intimacy is very vulnerable. And that's why a lot of people have difficulty with intimacy. Because they haven't learned to trust or feel safe in close, vulnerable relationships. So it's important to have that protection from the other parts of ourselves. Yes.
So, Vann, in one way that raises the question of the behavioral use of the ego states, to the sense that when the adult is fully functioning, the parent and the child are working, some people say, within the adult, and that isn't particularly my reference, but I see it here that the adult has a function, the parent has a function, and it's not just to completely disappear.
That's right.
Say more about that.
Well, some people in TA believe that parent and child are totally archaic, and you need to integrate them into your adult, so that you end up with adult ego state that functions in all those ways. My sense is that we need a child, we need a parent, and we need an adult. And as long as they're operating in an integrated way, then they work well together. But we don't need to get rid of our child or our parent. We simply need to integrate them along with the adult information. And each ego state has value in and of itself, and a different type of function. So there are two different ways of conceptualizing basically the same phenomena. I think there's not a lot of difference in what people are actually trying to convey, but it's two ways of conceptualizing it. Yeah, different ways. I've been doing personal work for myself for at least 40 years, and I still discover new things. Yes?
I'm having a little bit of a hard time interpreting this graph. What I'm getting from it is that our life script is something that, so as a natural child, what I'm understanding is that we make a life script that determines whether we're going to come from parent, adult, or adapted child. Would I be correct in that?
Yes.
Oh, in that case, this is obvious then. Okay, so then what I'm also getting is that not a lot of people operate from intimacy, and that even though this chart looks that way, that there can be frames of reference for each person that sustain a relationship completely without intimacy. Would that be correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yes. So let me give you an example of how all of this works. If I grew up in a family where I experienced a lot of abuse, I decided that the world is a scary place and you can't trust people. Most people are out to get you. And I experienced somebody relating to me in a way that is caring. I may redefine that by telling myself, I know what they're up to. They're just out to sucker me in, and once they get a chance, they're going to zap me. So I'm discounting, deleting, distorting information that's relevant to solving the problem. And I'm redefining the meaning of their behavior. And I'm responding in a suspicious and maybe antagonistic way because of my own internal frame of reference. If, on the other hand, I grew up in a family where I was the last child, the loved child, and everybody doted on me, and I may decide the world is a wonderful place and everybody will love me. And somebody does something that's hurtful in the present. I may decide, I may redefine that into they're just concerned about my welfare and trying to help me. And I may set myself up for getting legitimately hurt by not realizing what they're actually doing. So I have an entirely different frame of reference from the first person, but I'm really not looking at reality, I'm redefining it into what I want to believe. And contamination of the adult is another way of talking about that. If the child wants to believe something strongly enough, the child may only look at evidence for what they want that will help them rationalize what they want to believe. You see that a lot with stalkers who decide that this movie star is really secretly in love with them. And so they stalk them, believing that one day they're going to reveal their true feelings to them. So people do all kinds of things out of contamination of their adult, rather than look at the actual reality factors. And people also contaminate their adult from their parent. They use their adult to get information that would justify what they already believe, like everybody's out to get me. And they would only look for examples of things, people doing negative things. Or when people do positive things, redefine that. So our frame of reference is a way of attempting to make the external world consistent with our internal belief system. And we work very hard to do that because we know how to survive in the world we grew up in. So if we can just keep justifying the world as that way, then we know what to do to keep ourselves safe and protect ourselves. But we cut ourselves off from a lot of possibilities if we do that. Any questions about that? Yes?
So in TA, is are personality disorders related to the contamination of the adult?
Yes. And exclusions also. Yeah. The book Ian Stewart and I wrote on personality adaptations looks at how we adapt our behavior in order both to survive as a child and to meet the expectations of the world around us. And people will have these adaptations on the spectrum from completely healthy to completely dysfunctional. When people are using, and all these adaptations have both positive and negative aspects. When we're using only the negative sides of the adaptations in a chronic maladaptive way, that's what we call personality disorders. But we have the same styles at all different levels of functioning. Yes?
Everybody has a personality adaptation.
Right.
Everybody. So we need to know what is our
It's helpful
help.
to know your personality adaptations because each one operates in a certain way with regard to the external world. Each one has a particular way of making contact with the world through either thinking, feeling, or behavior. Each one has a target area for growth and change, which will either be feeling or thinking. And each one has a trap area in which they have the greatest defenses. So if you attempt to work with somebody in that trap area, all the walls go up and you get nowhere. So if you know those doors for each of the adaptations, you can quickly make contact, establish rapport, and then move to the target area where you're going to get the most benefit in terms of therapy. And stay out of the trap area where you're going to get stuck and get nowhere. And regardless of your therapeutic model, those adaptations apply. And the doors apply. So it really helps facilitate the therapy process. Or the change process if you're doing consulting. Or the educational process if you're teaching. Okay, so in addition to our frame of reference, we have certain behaviors that we use to try to maintain that frame of reference, and those are rackets and games. And rackets and games are how we use our transactions for ulterior purposes in order to support and justify our script by, again, trying to make the external world fit our internal frame of reference or belief system. So those are the two ways people will support their life script, either by maintaining psychological rackets or by playing psychological games. So the first issue I want to look at is what is called racket analysis. Which is looking at how and why we maintain certain unpleasant feelings. So I'll give you several definitions of a racket. One is the process of seeking out and maintaining a familiar unpleasant feeling as a way of manipulating support from the environment. If I grew up in a family where anytime I got angry, people told me I was being bad and misbehaving and not polite or not Christian or whatever. But as soon as I started feeling sad, everybody dropped everything and started trying to take care of me and help me. Then it's not long before I learn what to feel if I want support from the environment, if I want mom and dad to pay attention and try to help. They dismiss me or criticize me if I'm feeling angry, but if I'm sad, they immediately start trying to help. And that's what rackets are all about. Kids learn the feelings that work to get support from the environment. So once the child learns that, they will use it over and over again because it works. Another definition is the process of escalating a familiar unpleasant feeling rather than taking direct action to solve the problem and resolve the feeling. Do you need an example of that? Okay. So, excuse me. So if somebody does something I don't like, rather than tell them and talk to them and problem solve, I get very angry. And then when they try to figure out what's going on and try to solve the problem with me, rather than take action to solve that, I escalate my anger. That's a racket. What we call unpleasant feelings, the value of all unpleasant feelings is a stimulus for problem solving. They let us know what our needs are and they motivate us to take action. For example, if I'm angry, I can ask myself, what's going on that I'm responding to with anger? Second, what can I do about that? And look at all the options I have. Third, I can take an option to solve the problem and drop my anger. If instead of doing that, I escalate my anger, that's a racket. Because what I've learned is that people will pay attention to me and give me strokes if I'm angry enough. Or sad enough, or scared enough, or whatever worked in my family. So people will often try to escalate the feeling as a way to get somebody else to take care of me so I don't have to do it for myself. Yes?
Could this be said as a way to validate an injunction from childhood?
Do you have a specific example you're thinking about?
Yeah, so I have the injunction, I'm not wanted.
Right.
And one way that I process that is that I go into well, I go into situations checking that out to see if I'm not wanted here.
Right.
And then usually it's true. I'm not wanted. I don't have a real way that I can see to resolve that one.
Well, again, what we tend to do is look for evidence to support our frame of reference. And so you're looking for information, or that will help you justify what you already believe to be true. And so, yes, people will do that. I mean, that's the way we continue to justify staying in our life script.
And then I just wanted you to elaborate on escalating, because I'm thinking of anger as the feeling, not a behavior associated with it representing it. So you're saying when I'm escalating my anger, I'm also doing something else. I'm maybe raising my voice. I'm doing some behavior with it.
To try to
Not just
manipulate the
stuffing it.
environment into responding the way I want.
Okay, so it's anger with the
Road
behavior.
rage is a great example.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Any other questions? So again, the purpose of unpleasant feelings are that they let us know what we're needing. If I'm angry, it lets me know somebody is invading my space in some inappropriate way, and I'm needing to set limits. I'm needing to say, hold it. It's not okay to treat me that way or talk to me that way. If I'm sad, it lets me know I need some nurturance and support that I don't have, and it's a stimulus to motivate me to reach out to get that. If I'm scared, it's a stimulus that lets me know that I need some protection and safety that I don't have, and it motivates me to reach out to get that. If I'm confused, it lets me know I need some information I don't have, and it is a stimulus to ask for the information I need. If I'm guilty, it lets me know I've wronged somebody in some way that I don't feel good about and I need to make amends. And so on. Each negative or unpleasant feeling lets me know something that I'm needing, and it motivates me to take action to solve the problem. So they are a stimulus for problem solving. So again, the sequence is to first identify what I'm feeling. Second, what's going on that I'm feeling that way about. Third, what can I do about it? And look at the whole range of options I have. Fourth is choose an option. And 5 is to implement the option and to let go of the feeling. Again, if I escalate the feeling rather than problem solving, that's a racket. And chances are I've learned I can get attention and help from other people by escalating the feeling. Those of you who are therapists probably have clients who come in, and every session they're sad and crying. And anytime there's something that's upsetting, they are sad and crying. When what they may need to do is to use their anger to set a limit with somebody and not let them abuse them. Other people, every time there's a problem, they're anxious. Or other people, every time there's a problem, they're angry and frustrated, irritated. So when people go into the same feeling over and over and over again, you can almost be guaranteed that's a racket. Unfortunately, in traditional mental health, with people who don't know about rackets, they often reinforce them by trying to medicate them. So if you're the least bit blue and you're put on an antidepressant, it's a way of stroking your racket. Or if you're mildly anxious and you put on an anxiety medication, that's a way of stroking the racket, rather than looking at what the real problem is and helping the person solve it. somebody is depressed to the point where they're non-functional, then being put on medication is like putting a life preserver on that holds them up to the surface of the water so that they can learn to swim. You know, they can effectively problem solve. Or if they're so anxious that they're not able to focus and stay present, some anti-anxiety medication is helpful in terms of helping them do that. But some of the worst drug abuse in our society is prescription medication when people don't really need it. And it often masks the feelings that they're needing to deal with to solve the problem. And if people know about rackets, then they can cut through those and help the person problem solve and not reinforce the negative feelings. Rackets are the feelings that people go into in a situation of stress. If you want to know what somebody's racket is, watch how they drive down a busy freeway. People with an anger racket will be shaking their fists, yelling obscenities at people. People with an anxiety racket will be clutching the steering wheel, afraid somebody's going to run into them. People with a confusion racket will lose their way 3 times between here and the corner drugstore. People with a guilt racket will feel very badly if they pull in front of somebody, and so on. So we tend to go into our racket in a situation of stress. They are learned through life situations. Parents often model that the thing to feel in a situation of stress is X. In the family I grew up in, whenever there was a situation of stress, my mother got anxious, my father got angry. Those were their rackets. I probably only saw each of them be sad once in their life. They had a be strong counter injunction, and so they didn't show sadness. They substituted anxiety or anger as instead. Give you a story about how kids learn rackets out of life situations. A little kid comes home from school. He's made all A's on his report card. He hit 3 home runs at the ball game. His girlfriend told him she loved him. He comes in all excited and says, "Mommy, Mommy, let me tell you about my day at school." She says, "Run and play. I'm busy fixing dinner. I'll talk to you later." Well, his balloon just goes, all the air goes out. The next day, he flunks his math test. He strikes out at the ball game. His girlfriend tells him she doesn't love him anymore. He gets in a fight on the way home. He comes in with big tears rolling down his cheeks. Mother drops everything and starts taking care of him. Well, it doesn't take many days like that before he knows what to feel when he gets home from school if he wants Mother to pay attention and listen to him about his day at school. So kids will learn very quickly what feelings work to get the parent's attention. And the parent will usually stroke the child when the child is feeling the parent's racket. So if the parent's racket is anxiety, when the child gets anxious, they get all hovering and trying to help. Or if the parent's racket is anger, if the child is sad, they say, "Stop being such a wimp." But if the child is angry, they say, "Okay, now I'll listen to you. What's on your mind?" So the parents will often respond to the child when the child is feeling their racket, the parent's racket. The rackets are what, again, the parents paid the most attention to the child for feeling. And again, they are the feelings that the parents modeled in a situation of stress. and they're a little like old shoes. They're just worn out, but they're well known and comfortable, and the person has such a hard time letting them go. And because they're so well known and familiar, there's a certain degree of psychological comfort associated with them. So as I said earlier, when we leave home and go off to college, we can take our racket along with us and make college feel just like home did. And when we leave college and go to our, form a new home, we can take our racket along with us and make the new home feel just like the old home did. So people work very hard to try to justify the racket. They are a large source of strokes, and the child experience that they work in terms of getting people to pay attention. As a therapist or a consultant, when somebody's in the racket, you will often have the experience of going, oh no, here we go again. Because the feelings don't feel genuine. The tears feel like crocodile tears, You're not moved by it. When people move into natural child feelings, you feel moved with empathy. And that's the way you can tell the difference. So it's very important not to pay a lot of attention, not to reinforce, not to touch or stroke the person when they're in a racket. It's important not to try to rescue the person, because you will only reinforce that behavior. So what's important is to cut through that by asking them, one of the things that's helpful is often to ask underneath what they're displaying, what are they really feeling? Or what are they wanting to do about what they're feeling, to help them move into problem solving and out of the racket. The Gouldings like to talk about people's favorite cop-outs for not taking responsibility for what they're feeling. In childhood, it feels like things happen to us and we automatically feel a certain way. And that frequently can be true. But as adults, what we feel depends on how we interpret the stimuli that are coming in. For example, I can see you looking at me and think, wow, she doesn't like what I'm saying, and feel anxious. Or I can think, wow, she's really interested in this, and feel good. What I feel emotionally is how I interpret the stimuli that are coming in, the meaning I put on those. So I'm actually controlling my feelings by what I'm telling myself internally. And people are often not aware of that step. And they often use a number of rationalizations for what they're feeling. One is the gene theory. I'm an angry man because my father is an angry man. It's in the genes. I inherited it. When in reality, I learned to respond to things angrily by watching my father do it and learning his racket. Another is my horoscope. I'm depressed today because my moon is in the 4th orbit, or it's the lower edge of my biorhythm, or whatever. Or other things or other people make me feel. The weather outside is depressing. Or you're making me angry. When in reality, again, I'm feeling what I'm feeling because of what I'm telling myself about the weather or about what you're doing or whatever. Another favorite cop-out is my unconscious makes me feel. Freud said the unconscious is the other 2/3 of the iceberg that's not visible and nobody knows how to get to it directly. So whatever I don't want to take responsibility for, I can always blame on my unconscious. Flip Wilson's favorite cop-out was, the devil made me do it. Some people want to blame it on God. It's the Lord's will that I should suffer this way. It's pretty grandiose. So all of those are ways that people often try to shift responsibility onto somebody or something else for what they're feeling. So some of the ways that people justify their racket is that they will look for evidence to help justify what they're feeling. For example, if my racket is anxiety, I'll read the newspaper about all the scary things that are happening in the world and escalate my anxiety. Or I'll watch news on TV and do the same thing. Or I will get together with a friend who has the same racket and we escalate each other's scares. Benita English calls that racketeering. So I look for evidence in the newspaper, on the TV, talk with others who have the same racket. When I can't find any other justification for feeling what I'm feeling, I can set up a game to justify my racket. Games tend to justify what I'm already feeling and believing internally and shift the responsibility onto somebody or something else. So if I had an argument with my spouse before I came into the room and I'm really feeling irritated and angry, but there's no stimulus in the room for feeling angry, I could do something that somebody else didn't like, which would be a kick-me game. They might say something to me, and then I say, "You're making me angry." So the game allows me to justify my racket and shift the responsibility when I can't find any other stimulus around me for justifying what I'm feeling. The Gouldings talked about how people keep themselves in a racket, and they said, you know, if you look at the past and the future on a horizontal axis, familiar places and unfamiliar places on the vertical axis. The middle is the here and now. And if you stay right in the here and now, the feelings you have are going to be appropriate. Natural child feelings in response to what's happening. If I suddenly start to feel bad, the only way I can do that is to leave the here and now. I might go over into the past and remember something that happened, you know, in the 3rd grade and feel bad about that. Or I might jump over into the future and think about what I've got to do next month and feel anxious about that. Or I might go to some familiar place like home and think about something that's happening there and feel anxious about that. Or I might go to some unfamiliar place like the Middle East and think about what's happening there and feel anxious about that. So in order to move into a racket, I have to leave the here and now. And that's how people will keep themselves into rackets, is by not being in the present moment. So if you've read the book Now, or other books that emphasize staying in the here and now, those are very helpful in terms of realizing the past is gone and there's nothing I can do about it. The future's not yet. There's nothing I can do about that. The only thing I can affect is the present moment. And if I stay right in the present moment, I'm going to not be in the racket. I'm going to be feeling whatever is relevant to what's happening in the present. So again, if there's not a tiger walking through the door, there's really not a reason to feel anxious. And I have to leave the here and now to do that. Any questions about that? Yes.
And about problem solving, the previous you told, and bad feelings. If you just cover that bad feeling and just let it go, maybe in this being in present moment, also you can do it that okay, leave it and just let it go. If it works, or because you told that you should go there and see what's there in behind that surface level. I mean that for yourself or even for other people, that they don't like to open the matter and they just like to let it go and then.
Yeah, I think if you're in a context where it's not appropriate to deal with a feeling, you can make an appointment with the person to talk with them about it later. If you are in a situation where it's appropriate to talk about it, if it is a natural child feeling, it's letting you know some need you have that's not being met, and it's important to talk about that to solve the problem, get your need met. If you recognize that it's a racket, the most appropriate thing to do is let it go. And look at what's really underneath that you may be feeling instead. Because that's the feeling you need to use to solve the problem. Any other questions or comments about rackets? Do you get a sense of what rackets are all about? Right. Okay, so I think this would be a good place to, yes.
So if you identify your own racket, how do you help people in your life not reinforce it?
By identifying what's underneath that and using that feeling to ask for what you want and solve the problem. So you're not inviting people to give you attention for some feeling that's really not appropriate. Or you might ask them to ask you, yeah, what's underneath that? You know, what are you really feeling? Yeah.
So, if I believe has to do with the belief system, but if my belief system is strong enough that I am too small to solve this problem, haven't learned enough to solve this problem. But at any rate, whatever the belief system is, that can keep me pretty anchored to a racket.
That's right. Yes. Question back here?
I submit that belief system is in the unconscious.
Yes, a lot of it, what Freud talked about as the unconscious, Byrne talked about as out of awareness, because it's a more useful concept. People often believe they can't bring into consciousness what is unconscious. It actually is very easy to do. And we have ways of doing that now that Freud didn't know about. So if you know that it's simply out of your awareness and you learn how to bring it into awareness, then you can take charge. And that's the whole purpose of taking a look at all this information, is beginning to get aware so that you can exercise conscious choice. And you're not just living out an unconscious life plan. Okay, so I think this might be a good place to stop for lunch. We'll again come back